Okay, that's better. Alright, so no do feel. Yeah, so this is a talk I gave like a week or so ago for like a first, it wasn't a first year, it was like a couple of years of university students in the UK. And just trying to give them like, they're game development students, and I was trying to give them like a vague idea of what is UI about in games. Like, how can we think about UI? I'm definitely not a UI expert. This is something that I've just kind of like cobbled together over the years. And so this is, yeah, take this with a grain of salt. If it's useful for you, go for it. If you want to change it, go for it. If it's not useful, go for it. Try something else. So, yeah, I guess I should talk a little bit about who I am first. I'm Ben. Right now I'm lead programmer on a new project at Brace Yourself Games. Previously, I was. Oh shoot! I can't hear anything. Ah. Okay. Professional. Yeah, Discord was muted, but Twitch wasn't. Okay. Can you hear anything, Cassie? Sorry. Okay. Let's go back. Yeah. Previously, I was. Yeah. So no do feel is like going to be a framework that might be useful for you if you want to change any of the stuff or use bits of it, whatever. I'm definitely not like a UI professional, as my not being able to work the UI in Discord is a test too. So yeah. Ooh. How am I doing this? Oh, Discord's gone. The slides things have gone weird. Why has that got stuck? Alright, I'm gonna do it down here. Okay, so yeah, right now I am working for BYG. Let's put that up there. That's small. Yeah, right now I'm working for Brace Yourself Games, and I'm working on an unannounced project. Previously, I was the UI programmer at Industries of Titan, so that's like a city building game with lots of menu, lots of UI stuff. I implemented it, but I also helped design it with the lead artist. So some of this stuff I've kind of thought about through that. So it's sort of in the context of PC games and yeah, stuff like that. So during this talk, there's going to be bits where you can shout out stuff. You can do it in the chat. You can do it wherever. But it's kind of, yeah, gonna ask you to think a bit about stuff. Okay, so the framework that I'm trying to propose is like thinking about UI and what in the way that what can we do with UI? So with UI in a game, we can let players know things, we can let them do things, and we can let them feel things. It seems kind of vague right now, but we're going to go dive into each one of those and like how we can think about each of those. So let players know something. So there's two layers to this. So you could think about letting them understand something through an individual element, but then you can also think about like the bigger picture. So it's still pretty vague. Let's start small. So in your game, you probably have a bunch of information like the character's name, their health, the number of coins they have, the number of flowers they planted. And you really want to convey this information to the player, usually, so they know what's going on in your game. If they don't see it in the UI, or if they don't see it through something in the game, then it might as well not exist. So the simplest way is you just surface all of that information. You just show the information on the screen. Like, how hard could it be? That's all you need to do. And you can do that, but it sort of ends up looking a little bit like this. This is World of Warcraft with a bunch of mods on it. So it seems completely over the top and hard to read, but it's kind of useful for a power user, I guess. Like all the information is there. It's not like presented in a particularly nice way, but it is all there. But the point is I'm trying to make is that you can think about ways of surfacing this stuff in different ways. Okay, so if we don't want to show the player everything all the time, how do we decide what to show the player? Well, we need to know what do they need to know, and when do they need to know it, and what's important and what's not important. So we need some sort of way of categorizing stuff or deciding how to show it. Taking the example of health, You could show health in a whole bunch of different ways. You could show it in just like a straight up number, like x of y. You could show it as percentages, which is kind of excessive in this case, but you could do it. You could show it as a simplified way in hearts or as a progress bar. So I'm trying to show the idea here of there's, for a single sort of piece of information that's within your UI, within your game rather, there's different ways you can show it to the player. Maybe this isn't revolutionary, but it's to try and get you thinking about, okay, maybe the simplest way of showing stuff is not always the best. So the choice you make for this will depend on what type of game you're making. So if we take a concrete example, imagine you've got an action game like Spyro or Mario. It's sort of a kid-friendly, relaxed, simple play experience. From this, we can start thinking about, okay, what does the player need to know related to health, and when do they need to know it? You could show their health all the time in super ludicrous detail with all these percentage bars, but do we need to do that for this type of game? So you could say, well, they need to know their health just kind of as a rough percentage, and they probably only need to know it when in an area where they could die. So like if there's no enemies around, then you don't really need to know your health. So yeah, like this is kind of what Zelda does, and Mario does. Like you just have health points, you just have hearts and stuff. You also want to kind of remind the player when they have low health and they could die. You probably want to remind them. That's why you have that sort of beeping, annoying noise. And then also kind of remind them when they pick up health. So you have sort of sound effects and animations for that. So sort of thinking about those use cases, it kind of becomes clear that like, okay, the hearts thing fulfills all these. It sort of works as a rough percentage. You can easily flash when it has when they have low health and they could die. And it's easy to show how much health, like when they pick up health. You could do the progress bar, but it becomes less clear like how much damage an enemy could do if you did that. You could see 4 hearts and imagine, okay, I can take 4 hits and then I can die. But with a percentage bar, you don't know if I hit that enemy, is it going to take off a small chunk, a big chunk? What's the kind of graduated sort of scale they're using for this game? Okay, so this is like why the heart thing works well for like an individual element. It doesn't require reading, which is useful for like a kid's game. It's really understandable at a glance. And it also shows you a guess of like how many hits the player you could take. Maybe enemies only do half a heart of damage, but it gives you like a ballpark idea of like, okay, 4, 8, or it's small numbers. It's not like tens of thousands or percentages. It's also super clear if you increase max health, which is great. You just add an extra heart. And yeah, you can flash them. This seems kind of basic, but like going deep on a single element and thinking about why you would design it a certain way, I think is important, especially if you're coming to UI from like a programming background where you're just like, oh, just throw the data on screen. Being more like conscious about what you're trying to communicate and what's important to the player it's a good start. Okay, so now we're going to go a little bit like zoom out a bit and say, okay, so that was one element. This is more about what if you have lots of competing elements, how can you decide what to show the player, and how can the player notice certain things over other things? Imagine you have health and you have score and where the enemies are and all this information. Like how do you prioritize that? So there's a open question thing. Can you think of any ways that you could change the way something is shown on the screen to give it a higher or lower priority to something else? So like its attributes. So this is kind of vague, I guess, but like, yeah, think about how you would change the way something is displayed in order to make it more visible or less visible. Okay, so in Discord we've got opacity. Yeah, if you make it less opaque, you're kind of making it have less contrast with the area around it because it's taking the color underneath. Size, yep, size is a really good one. contrast. Yeah, so contrast and opacity are kind of similar in this way. Contrast is like, okay, how much does it change to the stuff around it? If you make it transparent, then it's going to take the color of the stuff behind it. More in the center of the screen, yeah, so position is important. Position is interesting because, yeah, generally players will focus on stuff in the middle of the screen, but then after that, they'll probably look top left, because that's kind of the way we read with text. Bright color, yeah, colors can do that. It's kind of related to contrast, like a bright color. If you have a bright color on a bright background, there's low contrast but still bright color, so that's interesting. And yeah, animations, so like changing over time, flashing the color, some sort of motion. So yeah, this is kind of like, some of this seems obvious maybe, but it's to get you start thinking about, okay, how do we start? If we want to make players notice things or not notice things, what can we change about them? Okay. This isn't an exhaustive list, but this is like a sort of simple-ish basic list of things you could vary to make the thing stand out. This is, I guess, just to make it really obvious, like which one do you look at first? Okay, the one that is different to the other, bigger. I mean, if this was smaller, you probably would also kind of notice it. Doesn't have to be bigger. Yeah, color makes it stand out. Position, I mean, it doesn't have to be towards the center, it could just be different to the other things. Yeah, and motion. Okay. So this is another kind of key point. When you start doing priority, you often, first you want to make one thing important, and then players don't notice the other thing. So you make the other thing also important. And so you end up making kind of everything important. So these are all important in different ways, and I don't know, at least I am not super sure which one to look at first. I look at the red one and the wiggling one and the big one and the low one, and it's, yeah, everything is kind of, you want to think about relative priority. So next we're going to talk about how to, like a way of thinking about relative priority and helping to decide that when you've got like a list of a bunch of different elements. So like in Industry of Titan, we had a whole bunch of different things we wanted to show on the screen. We wanted to show the speed controls and the build controls and how many resources you have. So I kind of listed all these things out that I wanted to show to the player, and then you can start ordering them for, which one I think is probably most important most of the time, and which one is least important. Then you can start using these attributes to make certain things appear more obviously than the others. Okay, so this is a framework from Zach Gage that in his talk called Building Games That Can Be Understood at a Glance. So yeah, those slides are great and the video is great. I'm just totally stealing this one little bit from that called the 3 reads. So imagine we have we're walking through the subway, of the underground, and we're looking at a poster. We see there's a poster in a distance. The first thing we might see about it is the biggest thing, the most important thing. Zach Gage calls this the first read. So if you see David Bowie and this big lightning bolt, you might think, okay, I want to know more. Maybe I'm a fan, or maybe I'm not, so I keep walking. But if I'm a fan, I'll think, okay, so I know what this is. I walk closer and I see stuff that is smaller, has less contrast. This is what he calls the second read. So it's a concert at the Hammersmith Odeon on this date. And then if I walk even closer, I get what he calls the third read. So this gives me some more information about the performance, the cost, the exact time, and the exact location. So this is, this works for posters, but you can also use it when designing UI in games. Yeah, it's only £2. This is 1973 prices, so that's probably like, that would be, hundreds of pounds now. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of, you pull the viewer in with the most important stuff first, and then the second and third. So the idea is, if you have a bunch of information you want to show the player, like imagine you're doing the UI for some complicated screen. Maybe it's the main menu, maybe it's character creation or character inventory. and you know you're going to have more than a couple of elements, it's important to sort of think about the relative priority of these things. You could have just a straight linear gradient of, okay, this is first, this is second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. But the idea of the reads is to kind of group things together. So instead of having, 20 different sizes of text, you just have 3, or you have 3 sort of major categories of stuff. And then also this priority it's not necessarily static all the time. So imagine you go into a special mode in the UI where you are deleting, or you're throwing things out of your inventory. Maybe the number of things you have at that point is way more important than the cost. Or maybe the cost is really important because you don't want to throw away expensive stuff. So yeah, in a particular mode, you could imagine increasing the priority of some piece of information. Okay, so we're going to have another sort of concrete-ish example. So imagine you wanted to design a simple inventory menu, and you had all these kind of pieces of information that you wanted to communicate to the player. It's kind of a lot of things, but you could maybe start grouping them or ordering them in a way that you think is most important. So this is after it's sorted. You could say, okay, I want the picture to be the most important thing because it's really helps the player understand what they have selected at a glance, more than having to read text. Text is there as a secondary thing. Then maybe okay, we always want to flag new items to the player. And then blah, blah, blah. And the least important would be, okay, if they want to navigate to another menu, they can kind of look in a particular place and see that. This is kind of like a backwards way of going towards this menu. It's like, imagine you hadn't designed this menu. That might be a way of deciding how to organize the information. You could see that okay, the item picture itself, and maybe that's this title, snack pack and tools might be most important. Although snack pack has got higher contrast because it's got the drop shadow there. So tools is less important. And the text of the description of the item is smaller. So yeah, it's kind of this idea of grouping items together or thinking about what the most important information is. Yeah, this is another example. What do you think is sort of in the first, second, and third reads of this Overwatch 1, relatively old screen? Does anyone want to jump in? I'm typing Discord. Yeah, to me the biggest thing, the first thing I notice is, yeah, Mercy herself. Yep, she's big. The character itself, yeah. So Overwatch is all about superheroes and stuff. So the most important thing is the character. Then yeah, the second read might be the logo or the play, training, hero gallery sort of things. That's one sort of font size, and then after that, yeah, pretty much everything else. Maybe you could say that there's a fourth read, maybe, and that there's this dialogue box down the bottom. It's very low contrast, very small. The fact that there's new stuff here, even though it's smaller, maybe you're trying to bring up the visuals. So it doesn't necessarily work bringing these things into what do you call it? Exactly. There's not exactly three perfect reads that you can categorize everything into, but it sort of starts you thinking about, okay, what's the most important thing? What's the second most important thing? Third, maybe there's a fourth group. Yeah, I just think it's a way of making your UI more readable. It makes you sort of, rather than have this infinite choice of everything could be 100 different font sizes, it starts getting you to sort of a way of thinking about grouping things up. So it's a tool. It's just a way of thinking about stuff. Okay, and here's another example. So you can sort of start thinking about the 3 reads for this example too. Could be yeah, maybe the first read is the character again. Maybe second read would be the actual items. Yeah, the text description. It doesn't quite as work here, so you can kind of show that you know, in a very simple game, it's easy to group things into just sort of 3 groups, but here there's kind of quite a lot of different things competing for your attention. These all have different colors and contrasts, but yeah, you could see that, like, okay, this is less important because the contrast is way lower and it's smaller. Yeah, and like there's a hidden way in the corner, so you wouldn't really notice those until towards the end, or to, you know, as a lower group. Did I have a third one? Oh yeah, here's Platoon. Yeah, the stuff that's the most important is in the middle and big. We're going to be talking about fonts and stuff later. And then, yeah, low contrast stuff is all sort of way in the top left-hand corner. Okay, so that was sort of talking about knowing how to let players kind of know information and understand things that are happening within your game. Then we're going to talk more about doing things. Okay. So, imagine you are an alien, or you've just, you know, come out of a cave and you've been there for 1,000 years or something, and you see this. How do you know that this is usable, and how do you know how to use it? So, if you have any things, you can throw them in the chat. Imagine you go into this box and you see these things, 3 somethings. You look at it, like, what's different about it that makes you think, yeah, they're different. Okay, as Stephen said, they're sticking out. Yeah, they're sort of protruding a little bit. You want to correct, yeah, you kind of, maybe you want to make them flat with the stuff surrounding it. Someone said labeled buttons. Well, yeah, but you don't know that they're buttons. It's the idea. But yeah, they have text on them. You look on them and you're like, okay, everything else doesn't have text. This thing does have text. That's interesting. I assume that numbers placed higher will take you to a higher level. Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah. Does the order of the buttons correlate to order within actual physical space? That's interesting. Lighter colors, yeah. So yeah, my point was, yeah. So like there is some contrast here to the surroundings. You do know they're buttons, so that's important. So if you have any existing knowledge for the concept of a button, that knowledge can be utilized here. That happens in games all the time, right? Like, how do you know what a cog means? Okay, cog means changing things. It means settings or construction. Yeah. Close in size to my hand. Yeah. So they're probably sort of finger size. If they were, 2 foot across, or, this big, 1/2 meter, would you think they were buttons? You would assume you have to press it with your whole hand. Yeah, they're actually probably placed close to your hand as well. Like, they're probably not all the way up here or way down on the ground. They're probably sort of hand height, vaguely. So yeah, there's a bunch of things that they're trying to get the user to use them, to show that they are usable. Okay. Yeah, they could have a light inside. Yeah, to be more noticeable. Okay, so we had a whole bunch that we came up with. I don't know if I skipped a slide. Okay, we'll categorize them after. Here's a whole bunch of things that I came up with, that a bunch of you came up with as well. Finger-sized, labeled, sticks out a bit. There's contrast to surroundings. So there's also the idea of, like, okay, if I start interacting with it, it actually has some sort of interaction that comes back. So if I push it, it does move. If I touched it and put some effort into moving it and it didn't move, I might think that it's broken or nothing's happening. Maybe it goes bing when I push it. And then, yeah, the lights up stuff. So this whole thing is called an affordance. So it's a potential action, blah, 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 that is easily discoverable. So a button has an affordance that you can push it. And the way it's laid out, or the way it's created, is supposed to be discoverable. So it looks sort of thumb or finger sized. It sticks out more. So it gives you the idea that you can push it in to make it flat. If you think about affordances, what are the affordances of a door handle? Well, you can push it, pull it, you can hold it, you could maybe turn it, you could hang your jacket on it, you could, I don't know, could do anything with it really. I guess it's like, but it's hand sized, it's hand located, it's in your hand. It's sort of on the edge of a door rather than the middle, so it makes you think of maybe it's a good lever for like moving the door. Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay. Already answered that. Sorry. Okay, so this is another kind of made up framework that I came up with that I call invite, react, confirm. So if we're going back to buttons again, there's kind of step one of a user interaction is where you're trying to get the user to start using a thing. So you're inviting them to, hey, this is a thing, try it out. So for buttons, that would be that it sticks out. It's sort of finger sized, so it makes you want to use a particular part of your body with it. For a door handle, it's hand sized. It has a label, so it might make you think, okay, I'm trying to find 2. I want to go to floor 2. So you look for the word 2. And then, yeah, contrast from surroundings. Like if you can imagine that button, if it was grey, you wouldn't notice it, so it wouldn't really be inviting you. It wouldn't start that interaction. The next step I call react. So it's like if you start trying to do something with it, does it change in a way that is sort of confirming, hey, you are actually changing something in the world. So you move the button, it moves. You push the button, it moves. Maybe it makes a sound or lights up. And then the confirm is kind of this final step of, okay, you were trying to do a thing. No, you saw a thing you wanted to do. You tried to do a thing. Hey, the thing you were trying to do happened, or like you have changed some state in the world. You succeeded, hooray! So that would be like, oh, the light on the button stays lit up, or the elevator starts moving, or the number changes. So those are like 3 different ways of kind of thinking about of an interaction. So imagine you've got a button. This is actually a button. It doesn't look like a button. It doesn't invite me to click it, other than it says click me. It has no react whatsoever. It does have a confirm, so I guess I get to know that I clicked a thing. So this would be a button that has no contrast with the surroundings, in like an elevator button. It doesn't move when you touch it, so I guess it's like a touch screen. And then I guess the elevator sort of starts moving after you accidentally bump into it. So, absolute nightmare interaction. But there's so many games and so many situations that this exists in the world. And it's awful. This is a different button that has the invite. Like, oh, okay, so which area is interactable? Oh, it's this boxy area. And it's sort of trying to pretend to be 3D. It has like a thicker bottom on it. I mean, I'm not a UI artist, so this is still pretty terrible. It has a react. Like when you mouse over it, the background changes, it changes the cursor. And then on confirm, when I'm clicking down, the color changes and the button sort of goes into the screen, like it's 3D, and it still does the click thing. This might seem like kind of obvious, but like I think thinking about this and making sure when you're making UI elements that they have these 3 parts, I think it's useful to it's to guide players through. Like you could have one that doesn't have an invite, but players might miss it. You could have something that doesn't have the react, but it doesn't feel as good. If you mouse over it, it doesn't really do anything. So you're not sure, is this interactable? If it doesn't have the confirm, then I guess, yeah, you don't know if I clicked on this thing, but did it do anything? It might be an action that like, okay, I click on it, I've given an order to a unit, but if there's no confirmation, maybe they're not going to immediately do it. If there's no immediate confirmation that the thing I did worked, I'm going to feel it's a bad interaction. Okay, so this doesn't only apply to buttons, this can apply to things that are in the world, more sort of non-UI things. So this is like, okay, you're inviting the interaction with this character by putting a big glowing exclamation mark above their head. Maybe it does the react when you get close, it changes color, or If you mouse over them, they get like a hover state around them. And then the confirm might be it changes once you click on them, it changes to a different shape. This is a video of Northgard. I'm trying to show that the invite, react, confirm. So invite here is not particularly clear. There's nothing that says that this person is particularly interactable compared to the rock or the tree. But in the case of this, I mean, you're kind of like, it's a unit-based game. I think maybe in the tutorial you try and tell people to click on stuff. It's like a compromise in this kind of situation between making everything glowy to like try and get the player to click on it versus, you know, some sort of nice clean world, you know, that you're trying to create. But the react is good. As soon as you mouse over them, they get a nice clean outline, and the cursor changes to a hand. And then when you click on them, they get that selection circle around them. Yeah, this kind of is trying to show that this can apply to stuff that's outside of like 2D UI. Okay. So that's, first we talked about sort of communicating information to players, and then we talked about getting players to interact with things and making that interaction feel good. And then lastly, you're going to get a little bit more, I don't know, feely about designing UI. Okay, so how can we let players feel something? So letting players be immersed in a world is not particularly revolutionary for video games. Like, that's literally what a lot of video games are. And we think about that from the sound to the in-world art history to the animations to the gameplay. The UI can also be part of that. Maybe it's sort of undervalued sometimes, but that's definitely something that UI can do. So yeah, here's a super stylized world with no UI. It gives you a certain feeling when you go there. The same for Okami. But like the UI can help emphasize that feeling, or at least not break it. So this is Paper Mario. You can see the UI is very papery. The handwriting style version of Talk there, it's on like a papery textured bit of UI. The idea of like making your UI reflect your game's aesthetic is not super revolutionary, but like it's a nice thing to do if you can pull it off, while still keeping the game like readable and interesting. This is Subnautica, so there's sort of a futuristic sci-fi game. There's a lot of sort of simplified, well, the world style is very kind of white and stark. The player's inventory and things they can build to sort of differentiate it from the animal world. And so yeah, the UI is that too. It looks like something that Apple would make. Yeah, this is Horizon Zero Dawn, so it's very tribal, lots of yeah, kind of like hand, like what do you call it, cave paintings or something. Very sort of rock textures on the backgrounds there. You can see as well, like this is I'm gonna cover this in the future, but you can see that for the typography, this Kaja hunter bow is in like kind of a, I don't know, simplistic font, but then typeface font. This body text it looks kind of like Arial. It probably isn't, but it's got like, you know, it's fairly readable. It's not super stylized. Okay, so we're going to talk about two different parts here. We're going to talk about shapes of the UI and then typography as like really simple ways to like communicate the feel of your world through the UI as well. And so this talk, immersing a creative world into a usable UI by Steph Chow, is like from a couple of years ago, but it's also a really good way of thinking about shapes and things. Okay, so this is taken from another presentation. So on the left you have Mario, and on the right you have Splatoon. You can see just by changing the shapes, you are changing the way that the UI feels. Like Mario is fairly, you know, cartoony and blobby, but still relatively kind of straight edged. And then the Splatoon one is, you know, it has drips, it has kind of bent edges and wiggly edges and paint splats. And you can try this out by trying to make your UI just with black and white. And you can see that like the shapes and the shape language can really communicate the feel of your UI even without any color or before you start doing color. They're also using typography here, so the Mario stuff is very kind of simple and blocky, but the Splatoon one is kind of rounded and looks kind of wonky and weird. fun. That leads us on to typography. So one of the things I think I've seen a lot from like indie games and smaller games is picking either too many typefaces or picking really stylized typefaces for text that's too small. And so this is like a really simple rule of thumb when you're trying to do typography for your game. You want to pick one display typeface and one body typeface. So a display typeface is something that's like this. It works really well at large sizes. It's very stylized. It has a lot of character to it, and it kind of communicates a particular world. So paintball there is basically the Splatoon one, English town. You know, it makes you think of oldie worldy English stuff. But on the flip side, you've got body typefaces. So these are way less stylized. They are designed to work at smaller scales for large amounts of text. That splat font one has still got a bit of character to it, but it's designed to work at those sizes. They have what's called a larger X height. So if you look at the O compared to the L at the start of each of those lines, you can see the O, especially for Deja Vu Sands in the top right, it's over half the height. So it means that even the lowercase letters are still very readable, or even the kind of smaller letters are still quite readable. Yeah. So yeah, they're aimed for different purposes. Like a display typeface is there for titles, and body is there for large bodies of text. Body typefaces often have like different weights and styles that can be useful in line for like emphasizing certain words. Yeah, basically don't try and use a display typeface like gift tag or English down for large amounts of text. I mean, like Oblivion did this back in the day, so you know people do it, but it's generally important to try and make your game feel a lot better that way. So here's a use case. You can see they've used the display typeface for like big stuff like weapon and 5.2 gallon, like the name of the weapon, and then everything smaller is in the body typeface. Although the numbers are in the display typeface, I guess they're like relatively simple there. So yeah, it kind of works. The same here, food menu is in the display, and then the body typeface is used for smaller stuff. Okay, so this is the last point I want to talk about, is like using UI to kind of add to the feel of the game. So when we think about like the feel of the game, we often, if it's like a horror game, you think about the music and the lighting and the gameplay. But the UI as well can help emphasize that. It might not be the primary way that players, you know, talk about, hey, I really love that game because the UI makes me feel a certain way. But it can, if you choose the wrong way, you can maybe undermine some of the feeling you're trying to go for. So if we go back to health systems, and we just think about a really simple like current health max health system. In the case of Final Fantasy, what it is kind of like a power fantasy, right? You start out the game and you're, you know, just escaped your burning village or whatever it is, and you've got 50 HP and like one basic attack. But then by the end of the game, you're fighting this huge monster and you've got 7,000 HP. Like showing that progression just in like raw numbers it totally fits. If you try to do that with hearts, it wouldn't really work. You'd have too many hearts, or you wouldn't show that progression. If you just had a progress bar, you wouldn't see that the progress bar has gotten much bigger. Well, okay, so Dark Souls kind of does that. Dark Souls has like a very small progress bar when you first start the game, and then by the end of the game it's like, you know, filling most of the top of the screen. So it has that power fantasy in that way. This is Borderlands, so they kind of try and do both, right? You've got the big numbers that are super satisfying. You start out with small numbers, you get big numbers, but it also has the health as readable at a glance. If you were trying to do like a horror game or, you know, Super Mario sort of cutesy run around game, these big numbers wouldn't really make sense. Even if you could technically have them under the hood, things could do very specific amounts of damage, but you would want to round them to something that's, you know, understandable to the player. This is from whatever first-person shooter it's from, I can't remember, but the blood mist is basically there as like a traffic light to the player, saying like go or stop. You know, if you see the blood mist, you need to get into cover, you're pushing too hard. And then if you don't, then it's just, you know, go nuts, shoot stuff. There are some games that have like more kind of fine-grained health systems like older shooters, but if you just want players to have like a really uninterrupted game, having like a simple kind of go no go system really works well with that. This is from A Hat in Time, so this is like a really simplified, like kiddie friendly game. So you just have health chunks. You know that there's a maximum of 4, and maybe enemies take off 1 piece each. Like it's pretty easy to understand. The power fantasy is not really there. Maybe you get extra health pieces by the end, but probably not. Yeah, different kind of feel. This is an interesting hybrid. Like it's Paper Mario, so it's sort of an RPG, but it's sort of kid friendly, so the numbers are not completely massive. I haven't played much of it, so I don't know if like upgrading your health is really that important. But it's, yeah, they've showed the current HP is like more important than the max HP. And then lastly, this is from Resident Evil. So in Resident Evil, it's like a survival horror game. So you kind of want the players to feel nervous and uneasy. By giving them this kind of partial information, they're not sure if they're hoarding health packs. Should I wait until I get to danger before I heal? How much do I heal? If I heal from danger to fine, am I at the top end of fine, or am I somewhere between fine and caution? Yeah, you're not giving player perfect information. You can imagine if you just gave them the raw number and said, oh, you've got 33 HP out of 100, your health pack does 64, you could really easily just use it at the optimal time, and it would remove that uncertainty. Yeah, this is a very simple example, but you could think, okay, what kind of player experience do I want to give my players? Do I want them to feel uneasy or powerful, or do I want them to feel, you know, relaxed and chill? And how can I design the UI to help support that feeling? Okay, so those are 3 different sort of sections of UI that I rambled about. Know, do, and feel. Oh yeah, so know is about individual elements, like designing them to show the information that is most important to the player and when. Then there's also prioritizing information. The affordance idea of sort of invite, react, and confirm when you're thinking about what players can do. And then for the feel, how do you make players feel a certain way about a UI, or feel a certain way while they're playing the game? You can do that through shape and typography, and then also what information you show to the player, like how that changes their player experience. Okay. Yep, these are some really useful resources. We Can Fix It in UI is a really nice Discord to hang out in and learn UI stuff. They definitely know way more than me. The Game UI database is really useful for like a huge list of screenshots and interfacing games also. And then yeah, this talk is available on my site. Okay, we got what, 10 minutes for questions? If anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or I can give you the stage or something.